Let's take a look at exercise 31 from section 2.2. So this is the identifier of the exercise where it is positioned in the online or printed textbook. However, this is number 12 on your section 2.2 homework. We're given the picture of a graph of a function. We're being asked to use symmetry, possible symmetry of the graph, to determine whether it is the graph of an even function, an odd function, or a function that is neither even nor odd. So when a function is even, you have symmetry with respect to the y-axis. So the graphical part that is on the right side of the y-axis will have a mirror image on the left side of the y-axis. So you would see something that looks like what I'm sweeping out with my pointer if this were indeed an even function. So notice, just looking at what you see in quadrant 1, you don't see the mirror image of that in quadrant 2. So what you see on the right side of the y-axis is not reflected on the left side of the y-axis. When you look at the portion that's in quadrant 3, you don't see that either. And it has to happen for the entire graph. So we have a portion of the graph left of the y-axis lying in quadrant 3, and we don't see the mirror image of that in quadrant 4, which would be the right side of the y-axis. So the graph in its entirety is shown. Part of it appears right of the y-axis. We don't see the mirror image of that left of the y-axis. Another part of the graph appears left of the y-axis, and we don't see the mirror image of that right of the y-axis. So this graph is not even. Whatever is pictured on the right side of the graph is not reflected on the left side of the graph, and vice versa. So the function is not even. Now, when we go to look at whether the function is odd, we're looking to see if we have symmetry about the origin. So what that means is whatever is pictured in quadrant 1 will be reflected in quadrant 3. We clearly don't have that. This picture in quadrant 1 is not mirror imaged in quadrant 3. So this is not an odd function. And whatever, if the graph did have any appearance in quadrant 2, if the function were odd, that would be mirrored in quadrant 4. So the graph doesn't have anything in quadrant 2 or 4. So we don't have to consider that for this graph. But if the graph did have portions in quadrant 2, the mirror image of that should be shown in quadrant 4. So when a graph is odd, whatever portion of the graph appears in quadrant 1, the mirror image appears in quadrant 3. Whatever portion of the graph appears in quadrant 2, the mirror image appears in quadrant 4 whenever a graph is odd. So you don't see that either. So this graph is neither even nor odd.